Why would that be?
We're going to use the chumash too. So. Yeah, pass these out. We need chumashim and we need this. Good morning. How are you? You got my menu. Good morning. Sorry? You're looking good. It's probably colder here than in New York.
So the guy who wants to be famous.
I was going to give you a call, you know. He got himself.
A complicated guy.
He got himself. Okay. Whoops. Oh, it's warm in here. It's nice. It's a machaya. Yeah, I'm going to talk about it. That's what we're going to do today. There was a lot of Facebook traffic about it also.
You know something? It sounded, it read racist to me.
That's what the traffic is all about, yeah.
And the Ashkenazi Jew, it's like, hasn't he noticed that there are various times in history where the brilliant thinkers are non-Ashkenazi? Is there anyone that ever matched Rambam in terms of thinking in Jewish history? No Sparta, no Mizrahi, there's no thoughts about it.
Rabbi, Shabbat Shalom.
It's racist, it's subset racist.
If you think you're smarter than everybody else, the least you can do is shut up. You know, don't say it. It shows you the slip. It shows you the slipping level of Ashkenazic genius that he would do that.
You know what? He was a lot more humble when he had the Wall Street Journal as his platform.
Maybe. All right. Good morning, everyone. Good Shabbos. Happy Hanukkah. Happy New Year. Merry Christmas. A good Freilach Kwanzaa to you. There's a Hindu holiday too. Whatever that is, we wish you a Mazel Tov. Sorry, what? Happy holidays. I want everyone to be happy. Yeah. Everyone should be happy. Live and be well. Well, welcome back. I was thinking like no one's going to come. It's freezing cold. It's Yontif. You know, you're here. I'm so impressed. You are hardcore Jews. Surely watch out. Someone's going to tell you to get past you here. So really, hardcore Torah study, people. My God. So here's welcome back. I wish everybody I hope everyone's having a lovely week. It's a strange week, you know. It's with 2 holidays in the middle of the week. No one's working. Have you been on the freeways? Like, you can walk. It's a machaya. I mean, yesterday I drove. Took me 15 minutes to get to the city. It was like unbelievable. It's just great. Anyway, welcome back. I hope everybody is well. I hope you've enjoyed these holidays. Today is Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh, and Hanukkah. It's the few times in the year we actually take 3 Sifrei Torah out. So you get your money's worth out of shul today, boy. So they're going to daven this morning, Shacharis, and then a full Hallel, because it's Hanukkah, and Rosh Chodesh. And then we take out 3 Sifrei Torah. Mel Barlam is having his 90th birthday today. He's getting an aliyah. He usually sits right there. I guess he's not here. He's sleeping in. Oh, there's Mel. There, you moved over. You moved over into the seat of honor. No, you don't. For Torah service? Nah. You have the first aliyah. First of all, if you're late, they'll give you a second or third aliyah. The 7th is the ufruf. So if you want to marry a really cute girl. But they're not taking out the Torah till 10:30, 10:45, because they do a Hallel today. So you're fine. You're just fine. Mazel tov, happy birthday. Should be in good health and be with us for many, 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 many years. We want to welcome you guys back from New York. Welcome back. And everyone is Mel's family. Welcome. This morning, Jack Donitz's daughter Alexis is having her ufruf, and they'll be celebrating. They have the 7th aliyah. Okay? And come on in, David. Come on in, come on in. Today's also the day of the NCAA football semifinals. So Clemson plays LSU.
Clemson plays Ohio State.
Clemson plays Ohio State, and LSU plays Oklahoma.
Are we going to get out in time for the first game at 1 o'clock?
Yeah, you'll be out in time by 1 o'clock. Yeah, maybe just in time, but 1 o'clock. You won't miss that, I promise. You may miss you'll miss the early bowl games though, because they started already. So you may miss kickoff, but
You could be watching the pregame.
it's a good USC game. If you're from Iowa, it was a good game, right? You got. They played in the Rose Bowl some years ago, the Iowa Buckeyes and Hawkeyes. Buckeyes are Ohio State. And we were walking around Pasadena. We went to Pasadena just to hang around and see the lights and things. And you'd say to people, "Where are y'all from?" Now, Iowa apparently is a 1-syllable word that you say with an open mouth. We're from Iowa. Whereabouts? And there's a Huppisville corner. Oh, I have a cousin who goes there. It's a shul there. It's like. And they're very friendly people. Like, they're in the middle of the country. They don't have an ocean. They don't have Democrats. It's a wonderful, it's a lovely place. They got corn is what they got. Lots of corn. Fried pork. Fried butter. Deep fried butter at the Iowa State Fair. Just in case your cholesterol's not high enough. Anyway, following our Torah study, you're all invited. The library meeting is meeting upstairs. We have a lovely service with Mel's birthday and Alexis and Brian's ufruf this morning. And then there'll be lunch after that and Torah study after that, okay? This next week, things are going to be very quiet in the shul because we're trying to give the crew as much time off as possible. So the synagogue will be closed Tuesday afternoon and Wednesday so the crew can have time for their families. And then we'll be back open up again on Thursday and Friday. We're back here next Shabbos. We'll be back here in 2020. Start the new year together, okay? The College of Jewish Studies will begin not Wednesday, but the following week, the 8th. We'll begin again with conversations. Talk about the next set of debates that shape Jewish life. And then during the course of not the next week, but the week after, it's the 3rd week in January, we're going to devote the entire week to the social justice agenda of the synagogue. Mostly with an emphasis on hunger and homelessness, which, as you know, is a huge problem here in LA. And on the Wednesday night, instead of the College of Jewish Studies, we're going to have a panel of the leading people in the homelessness issue in LA, including the county officials that are in charge of the program. And Steve Lopez, who writes for the LA Times, has agreed to come and speak. He's a very, very interesting writer. And he doesn't speak much in the community, so we were very blessed to have him come. So come, that'll be the 22nd. And everyone's invited to that, yeah.
I just wanted to mention that the Orthodox rabbi who spoke about Christianity at college last week
Ari Schwartzberg.
was exceptional.
Yeah, wasn't he a good guy? Yeah, good. Yeah, he's a lovely guy. Ari Schwartzberg is the dean of students at Shalhevet High School, and a very, very bright young man, and very worldly Orthodox rabbi, a sense of the world. And he spoke for us, and we had a lovely time together, he and I, and the community. So please, if you want to listen to that, it's on the archive. Go on the VBS website, and it says archive, and go to the archive, and it's all there. The whole series will be there. So come back and learn with us, and we'll do Torah study every Shabbos morning through the end of the springtime. Okay, this morning, if you're in the Chumash, we're on page 250, and there is a worksheet, and I'll tell you what this is all about today. Fortuitously, as Doug reminds me, there was a very interesting and in some ways very controversial column published in the New York Times yesterday, or last night actually, it came up this morning, by Bret Stephens, who is the one of the columnists for the Times. What was it called? Something about the secret of Jewish genius. The secret of Jewish genius. And he makes the claim, he points out, as many of us know, that Ashkenazic Jews have an outsized impact on Western civilization. Even though we're 1% of the population of the world, Ashkenazic Jews have won something like 27% of the Nobel Prizes, and there's a book about this now that just came out that points out all of the great geniuses that have shaped modernity that came from the Ashkenazic Jewish world. And Stephens wonders, why that is and how do you maintain that? And he talked about, there's a study that came out by a very questionable anthropologist apparently about whether it's genetic, whether you have, inbreeding long enough, you end up with higher IQs and things like this. And then what he attributes it to at the end of the article, we'll see this in a moment, is the status of Ashkenazic Jews as being outside, as being inside and outside, part of Western civilization, but separated from it enough that the Ashkenazic Jewish community could look down into modernity as from a critical place and see it without being totally engulfed in it. And because of that, you have a series of geniuses who rise up to sort of help us understand what modernity is, right? So you have Albert Einstein, who steps out of the world of physics and sees physics from a different point of view. You have Marx was converted when he was a kid, but he was born into a Jewish family. You have Karl Marx, and today we're going to talk about Sigmund Freud. People who were able to see that world, were in the world so they knew what that world knew, but were able to step out of it and see that world with fresh eyes. So today I'm going to pursue that thesis. If you haven't seen the article, when you get home, you can look it up. It's on the New York Times website, and it's probably going to be circulated quite a bit we still haven't mastered thermostats, though. Great geniuses, So I want to talk today about the two greatest dream interpreters in all of Jewish history, Joseph and Sigmund Freud. And I'm going to make the case that Stephens makes, which is that in both cases you have a mentality which is of the world which is in the world but not of the world. You have the ability to see the world through fresh eyes, through different eyes, and to see something that everyone else can see but no one sees it. That everyone else can see but no one truly understands it. And that's what you have in both of these cases. And I thought, and we haven't talked about Freud in a long time, so that'll be an interesting thing to do. So here's where we are. We're on page 250. To catch you up, this is the novella at the end of the book of Genesis about the character named Joseph. Joseph, you remember, is the second youngest son of Jacob. The youngest is Benjamin. He's the firstborn of Rachel, who was the favored wife. He's the favored son in the family. He's dressed in the coat of colors, which means he wears his favoritism literally on his sleeve, and walks around with this profound sense of bratty, infantile egocentrism. He has these dreams, and the dreams are that that the sun, the moon, and the stars all bow down to him. That's the clinical definition of of infantile egocentrism. The whole world bows down to me, right? And his brothers hate him, so his brothers attempt to sell him into Egyptian slavery. He ends up in Egyptian slavery. He ends up getting sold to the house of Potiphar. Potiphar is one of the ministers of the Pharaoh, and he does really well in the house of Potiphar until he meets Mrs. Potiphar. Here's to you, Mrs. Potiphar. Jesus loves you more than you will know. Ho, ho, ho. God bless you, please, Mrs. Potiphar. So Mrs. Potiphar tries to seduce the young man. The young man refuses. He runs out. She accuses him, and the master has to do something. It's clear that that Potiphar doesn't believe her, because otherwise he'd have Joseph killed in some horrible way. So what he does instead, sends him to the prison, to the royal prison. And in the royal prison, he meets two characters, the baker and the cupbearer. Apologies, Pop. And each of them has a dream. And Joseph interprets the dream. And sure enough, the baker is off and the cupbearer goes back to his station. And the last line of last week's Torah portion is the lowest line in the story. The cupbearer forgot all about Joseph. So here you have the man sitting you had him in the celestial heights, being worshipped by the sun, the moon, and the stars, and now he is in the pit of Egypt. You see the irony? You see the place? He was as high as you can get in his imagination, and he ends up as low as you can get in reality, and everyone forgets about him. And you only have to sort of crawl into his head for a minute, because his father hasn't sent a rescue mission. So it's clear that his father forgot about him. His family's forgot about him. Potiphar's forgot about all the goodwill that he brought to Potiphar's house. He forgot about him. And he gave the cupbearer the interpretation of the dream, and the cupbearer forgets about him. So he has gone from the heights to the depths. That's where we are. From the heights to the depths. Deep in this story, as you'll see in a few moments, there is a theory of history. And you have to remember who told these stories. These stories were told orally for generations and generations, but they were put together in the sacred text when we were in exile. Here we are by the waters of Babylon, the temple, the city of Jerusalem having been destroyed, the people of Jerusalem exiled to Babylon, and we are in exactly the same place that Joseph is. We are a people who once thought of ourselves as the chosen people of the God of the universe. And here we are, a pitiful, powerless, peripheral people, sitting by the banks of the Euphrates, of the Tigris and the Euphrates, with no power, with no influence, with no voice, completely invisible and forgotten. That's why you tell these stories, because these are stories of survival. And now the drama is going to pick up. Are you ready for the drama to pick up? So this is a world of dreams, and in a moment we're going to talk about dream interpretation. What happens after 2 years' time? So how long does he spend in this bottomless pit of being forgotten? 2 years. And you start again, you have to gather in, what are the moods of a person who's been forgotten? There's a moment of self-pity and of misery. There's a moment of anger. There's a moment of fantasies of vengeance, and then there's moments of resignation and deep depression, right? Even the word depression indicates going down, right? You're depressed, you're down. You just have to go through this, right? And through the Bible, people get into these moods. You have Jonah and the whale, for example, at the bottom, right? You have these moments of depression, of being at the end of the world, the end of your strength, the end of your ability to cope. And here he is at the end of his ability, and all of a sudden, history picks you up. Here's what happens. After 2 years, Pharaoh dreamed. Pharaoh has dreams. Who would have thought? Pharaoh has dreams. He was standing by the Nile, and out of the Nile came 7 cows, handsome and sturdy, and they grazed in the reed grass, but presently 7 other cows came out of the Nile, close behind them, ugly and gaunt, and stood beside the cows on the Nile, and the ugly, gaunt cows ate up the 7 handsome, sturdy cows, and Pharaoh woke up. What does that tell you? Right? It's bovine dreams, okay? Did you ever see the play? You ever see Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat? So this is done beautifully because it's all different different versions of contemporary music, and Pharaoh is the Elvis Presley character. And he pulls off his coat and he's wearing this jumpsuit that says "The King," and he sings this song. There were 7 fat cows and 7 6. It's a wonderful scene. I can't imitate it, but trust me, it's good. He fell asleep and he dreamed a second time. 7 ears of grain, solid and healthy, grew on a single stalk. Close behind them, sprouted 7 ears, thin and scorched by the wind, and the thin ears swallowed the 7 full ears, and Pharaoh woke, and it was a dream. That's a great phrase, by the way. Do you see how that works? V'hinei chalom. Hinei chalom, which is that moment you get when you have a very vivid dream, and you wake up and you say, oh my God, it was only a dream. It was one of those, it's so vivid and so real and so, in some ways, disturbing, but also engaging. Right? Next morning, his spirits were agitated. He sent for all the magicians of Egypt. Now, this is ironic, because Egypt was well known in the ancient world as the world capital of magic. This is Hogwarts East, right? This is where wizards and potions and defense against the dark arts, this is where all the magic of the world comes from. And who has more access to more magic than the Pharaoh? And all the magicians couldn't interpret the dream. And all of its wise men couldn't figure it out. And Pharaoh told his dream. No one could tell him what it meant. The Hebrew is poter. Poter doesn't mean interpret. Poter means to solve. Yeah, a pitaron is a solution. No one could, it's a riddle, and no one can solve it. It's a text, and no one can translate it. What does it mean? No one could tell him what it means, right? Which is kind of odd when you think about it, because it's pretty obvious what it means, but we'll get to that. The chief cupbearer spoke up and said, I must make mention today of my offense, chatati. I have sinned. Once Pharaoh was angry, and he placed me in the custody of the steward. Together with the baker, we had the same dream. A Hebrew youth was there. He interpreted for us, and as he interpreted, it came to pass, and I was restored to my post. The other was impaled. Thereupon Pharaoh sent for Joseph. So now you go directly from the lowest of the lowest of the low up into the palace of the Pharaoh. They must have cleaned him up. You're not going to put him as a prisoner in front of Pharaoh, right? And he was rushed from the dungeon, and he has hair cut and changed his clothes. I love that. The Torah tells you. They cleaned him up, you know? Like, why'd they tell you that? Like, why is that? I think that's just great. And he appeared before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh said, I had this dream, and no one can interpret it. I've heard that you can interpret dreams, right? Joseph said, no, not me, God. Okay, so he's changed. You can see that he's changed a little bit, right? And Pharaoh says, in my dream, I was standing by the banks of the Nile. Out of the Nile came up 7 sturdy and well-formed cows, grazing the reeds. There came 7 other cows, skinny, scrawny, ill-formed, emaciated. Never have I seen their likes for ugliness in all of Egypt. And the 7 lean cows ate the 7 sturdy cows. And when they consumed them, one could not tell that they had consumed them. Now that's a detail that wasn't there before. The telling of the dream is different than the dream itself. You see that? Right? And I woke in my other dream, there were 7 stalks of wheat, and the thin ears swallowed. And I've told my magicians, and nobody can tell me what they mean. Okay? What does Joseph say? Pharaoh's dreams are: 1, God has told Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 healthy cows are 7 years, and the 7 healthy ears are 7 years. It is the same dream. The 7 lean and ugly cows are for 7 years. 7 empty, scorched earths in the wind. There's 7 years of famine. God has revealed to Pharaoh immediately ahead are 7 years of great abundance, and then 7 years of famine, and all the abundance in the land will be forgotten. The land is ravaged by famine. No trace of abundance will be left in the land. Now, was that hard to figure out? What do you call that, by the way? Anybody know what you call that? What he just told them? Anybody take Economics 1 in college? Macroeconomics. Remember Economics 1? Macroeconomics. What's the first thing you learn in macroeconomics? A chart. And the chart has two curves. No, it's one curve. And the chart is Supply, demand, and price. Supply, demand, and price. What is he telling him? This is called cyclical economics. Tell me about cyclical economics. Oh, come on, guys, you did this in college. Cyclical economics. Farmer plants crops. Crops come in. Big, abundant harvest. Farmer brings harvest to market. Every other farmer brings harvest to market. There is an abundance of grain on the market. What happens to the price of grain? It drops. Farmer says, oh, heck, I was expecting a windfall. Instead of a windfall, I can barely make it. I'm working so hard. I'm producing all this grain. The price keeps dropping. I'm not making a living. So what does farmer do the next year? No, the next year he's going to plant more. He's going to plant more because he's getting less per acre. He needs to plant more so he makes more. He plants more. But the more grain that falls on the market, the lower the price. At a certain point, he can't afford this anymore, right? There comes a point when the farmer can't buy seed corn for the next harvest because the price of grain has dropped below the cost of producing it. It's at that point that he decides to
Throw it in.
grow less. Either grow less, or grow something else, or withhold it from the market, or leave farming altogether and go build pyramids. Because you make more money building pyramids than growing grain. When lots and lots of farmers decide it's more lucrative to build pyramids than it is to grow grain, what happens to the grain supply? The supply of grain falls, the price rises, but the problem is this. Have you ever been in the shower and it was cold? So you turn the hot. Now what happens right away? Nothing. It's always there's a lag. I don't know about you, but my hot water heater is like Jenemsveld, right? So you turn the hot water hotter, and it doesn't get hot right away, so you turn it even hotter. There is a time lag between the time you turn the knob and the time the hot water comes from the spout. In that time, you have turned it too hot. So farmer, having given up farming grain and gone off to build pyramids, now there is a shortage of grain. There is famine in the land. Yes, he will plant a new crop and bring in that crop, but in the meantime, there is famine in the land. Didn't you guys take macroeconomics? What the hell's wrong with you guys?
This is micro.
This is macro.
No, macro.
Micro is the farmer's thinking. Macro is the system, right? The system is set up for these kinds of cycles. Micro is you're right. Micro is the farmer's thinking. It's a cyclical economics. All economics in free markets work on a cycle, right? They all do. With cyclical economics, and then there's other things we could put in there, things like birth rates and inflation and stuff like that, right? We could get into this if you wanted to. Yeah, you end up with recessions, and you have prosperity and you have recessions. You have cyclical economics. Right now we have abundance in America, and the president is praying that we're not going to get a cycle in the next 6 months. Yeah.
Isn't it possible that the 7 years of famine are due to drought?
Yes, you're exactly right. There's lots of other things that could happen. Drought is unlikely in Egypt because they have a river. Even if you get drought in Egypt, you still have a river full of water because the Nile flows. But you could get locust, right? You could get blight, which is a disease in the right? You could get lots of things which will destroy we've had that here in America. You've had an economic prosperity, and all of a sudden you get a spike in oil prices or something, and you get natural occurrences which upset the market. You're exactly right. But even without the the normal cyclical economical system ends up with 7 years of periods of abundance followed by periods of depression, of recession. That's normal economics, right? That's normal economics. Joseph for some reason, knows he was sitting in prison all that time. He was reading economics. He read. He was reading, Samuelson and Milton Friedman and and Keynes, and so he wait. So here's what he does. Ready? Look at verse 33. Be right with you. Wait 1 second. Ready? Here's the genius. You ready for the genius? You see the first word of verse 33? What is it? No, verse 33 on page 253. We're on chapter 41, verse 33. In Hebrew, it's ve'ata with an ayin. Ve'ata means and now. The Hebrew translation is what? Accordingly. Accordingly. Ooh. Ooh, everybody go, ooh. That's a good word. Accordingly. What was Joseph brought in to do?
Interpret the dream.
What has he just done?
Pose a solution.
He interpreted the dream. He should shut up. He's done what he was brought in to do. But you Jews, accordingly, something else is coming. Yes, you want to add something? Go ahead. Yeah. Accordingly, yes, please, yes.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
If I bother you.
Yeah.
All the religions said God.
Yeah.
Okay. We have one religion.
Yeah.
Religion of God.
Yeah, okay.
If everybody believe in God, they don't kill each other.
That's true.
Everybody is believe on God.
Right.
One religion.
Yeah.
Religion of God.
Yeah, that would be ideal. That would be ideal. But unfortunately, everyone has their version of it, and everyone has their way of understanding it, and we have this nasty habit of killing each other over it. So you're right, it's painful. Michael?
Yeah, I think another part of the story, which I think is interesting,
Yeah.
is that it's a story of unintended consequences also.
Yeah.
Joseph, who interprets the dream, then gets to Pharaoh.
Wait, we're not there yet. Don't jump ahead.
Well,
Go ahead.
I'm sorry I jumped ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
And the unintended consequences come later. And I think another part of the story that's kind of interesting is that there's a tell earlier in the story when you mentioned the cupbearer forgetting about Joseph.
Yeah.
When we get to Exodus, Pharaoh has forgotten about Joseph.
Yeah.
And that's a tell.
Yeah.
That's a tell that foretells what's going to happen.
Lots of foreshadowing in the story.
Foreshadowing, yeah.
Right. First of all, the Torah knows that you know what's coming next. Right? You know what's coming. I mean, you know what's coming, right? And so it's a different kind of storytelling when the writer knows that you know what's going to happen next. And the writer then can play with you by putting all these hints into the story. You have a benign Pharaoh who's listening. The whole thing about the magicians in the Bible always come off badly, right? Moses is going to show up, the magicians are going to challenge him, and Moses is going to get him, right? I mean, that's why the magicians union in Egypt hates us, because every time a Jew shows up in the court of Pharaoh, we just smash magicians, right? Right? That's why there's no Jews at Hogwarts. Well, who's a guy who knew how to escape from places, right? That's exactly right. Accordingly, here's the part he wasn't asked for. Accordingly, let Pharaoh find a man. No, don't turn the page yet. That's what he should say is, you need a policy. But Joseph is very canny. He's been in prison long enough to know how to play the game of power. It's Yereh Pharaoh ish navon. Let Pharaoh see. It doesn't say find, it means see. Let Pharaoh see a bright man, a man of understanding. Right? V'chacham, and wisdom. Right? Discernment and wisdom. Set him over the land of Egypt. And let Pharaoh take steps to appoint overseers, and organize the land of Egypt in the 7 years of plenty, and let all the food of these good years that are coming to be gathered, and let the grain be collected under Pharaoh's authority as food stored in the cities. Let that food be as a reserve for the 7 years of famine, so the land may not perish in the famine. All right, economics students, what do you call that? Yes, but it's better than that.
Tax.
It's better. It's not just regulation. In the 7 years of plenty, what are we going to do?
Tax.
We're going to tax it. And what's that going to accomplish? It's going to keep the price up. That's called a price support. The reason you take grain out of the economy is to make sure that there's not the surplus that drives down the price and disincentivizes farmers from planting. It's called price supports. Even if you took the grain and burned it or threw it into the Nile, you would still accomplish the same thing. You would prevent the famine from coming because you maintain the price supports. You watching this? You paying attention to this? Because they're very important to understand economics, right? And then you have all this grain. What can you do with surplus grain?
Store it.
Here's Michael's question of unintended consequences. When you have surplus food, what happens in a civilization? The population rises. You get more people. You have more people. You have more food. You have more food. You have more people. This was Thomas Malthus's famous thing, right? Right? So you have more people. Now you're going to have lots of extra people. When you have lots of extra people, what ends up happening?
Higher demand for food.
You go to war. You either go to war or you start building cities. You start building, and you enslave people because you got to put them someplace. It's an interesting set of unintended consequences. What is Joseph's genius? Joseph's genius wasn't interpreting the dreams. The magicians of Egypt could have figured out the dreams. What was his genius? His genius was to realize you could do something about it. Right? The difference between the person who sees the rain coming and says, oh my God, the rain is coming, and the person who sees the rain coming and invents an umbrella. Anyone have an umbrella? You ever think about an umbrella for a moment? What an ingenious solution to rain, an umbrella. But think about an umbrella as a symbol of a kind of human genius which says, I am not subject to the forces around me. I can actually manipulate those forces to some extent. I can't get it to stop raining, but I can manipulate them to stay dry. This is the genius. Why couldn't the magicians of Pharaoh figure this out? Because their belief was, they're what?
They weren't Jewish.
That's true. You say, it's in Rashi, it says that. Goyish cup epis. Right, Rashi says it right on the spot, you know. You see, this is the supply side economics. Right? Now, think about this. There is a mentality which says, I can see what's coming, but I can't do a damn thing about it. It's inevitable. That attitude that what's coming is inevitable, that's a human attitude. A lot of people stuck in that attitude. It takes this is where Bret Stephens' column is right. It takes a very special genius to be able to say, I see what's coming. It's not inevitable, or at least it's not inexorable. It's not you can't do anything about it. You may not be able to stop it, but you can manipulate it in such a way that it can be managed or controlled. That's the genius. Do you see the genius there? That's the genius. The pagan world believed that everything that was of nature was inevitable. And the idea that you can build systems which modify nature, that's already a remarkable stepping out. I mean, think about what happens in the beginning of Genesis. God creates the human being and says to man, I give you dominion over my natural world. That's a remarkable statement. You get to mess with the natural world. Now, we have a different idea these days. We've messed with it too much and we've destroyed it, right? That's what the prophet Greta Thunberg says, right? But you have the capacity. You're not completely inevitably subject to the forces of the inevitable forces of nature, the inevitable forces of the world. You can manipulate them. That is a genius. There's a genius to that. And that's what Joseph introduces to the system. And Pharaoh says, gee, I never thought of that. You can manipulate the cyclical forces of an economy in order to, you level out the abundance and you raise up the want, the need, and you end up with abundance, with prosperity, which is modified, and you end up with recessions which are mild. And that's called monetary policy. That's what economic policy is all about. You can't eliminate them, but you can manipulate them. Is that clear? That's the genius here. Okay? Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to mention the umbrella analogy might not be as applicable as a cistern analogy, where he's gathering that water for use at another time, just like he stored the grain for famine.
Yeah. You look, this is the problem with Los Angeles. It rains and a billion, zillion, trillion gallons of water get dumped into Santa Monica Bay, and then you have a drought in the summertime and there's no water, right? So the question is, can you build cisterns and create some? So they're beginning to think this way. You know, instead of going to the Owens Valley and stealing the water, I mean, you know, which is what we ended up doing, right? It's the only reason why the San Fernando Valley exists, right? I mean, it's an interesting way of thinking about the system. Yes, please.
Rabbi, in support of what you said in regard of that...
Yeah, talk real loud.
In support of what you said in regard of that Joseph was able to manipulate or manage the situation.
Right.
Wasn't that the story of Abraham in regard that God told him to come out and look at the star? If I am the one who created all of this star, I can give you a son. Although you are thinking that you are according to astrology and so on, you would never be able to have a child. But if you want, you would be able to.
All right, that's very good question. So you're quoting some midrashim. So here's the question. Again, if you have a moment to read this interesting piece by Stevens. So the question is, what is the source of this Jewish ability to look at the world and see it through different eyes, right? And I'm suggesting that one of the sources is a basic idea that we aren't rooted, we are of nature, but we're not completely rooted in nature. Okay, so you have a set of midrashim which introduce this idea with Abraham, you know, in which Abraham is told that the inevitable cycles of history aren't going to touch him because he's covenanted. And astrology, what astrology predicted, isn't going to touch him because he's covenanted. And you have this Jewish protest. But I think it's very deep. You have this Jewish protest against any expression of inevitability that keeps us stuck. Right? And that, I think, is part of the genius here. So let me take a moment. Can we take a moment? I want to introduce you to the other great dream interpreter of Jewish history, which is Sigmund Freud. Right? Now, I bet this morning you weren't thinking about Sigmund Freud. But I think it's important that you think of that. All right, so Sig Freud is born into an assimilated Jewish family in Central Europe. Spends most of his life in Vienna. He's trained as a doctor, research in zoology and neurology. And then he turns to psychiatry. And he's trying to figure out all of these, what was called hysterical symptoms. You know, people who had various forms of paralysis and other kinds of symptoms for which there were no physiological reasons for this to happen. And, you know, that's his biography. And he begins talking and figuring this stuff out, okay? And I gave you 3 just brief statements about his Jewishness. He was no way, a member of Valley Beth Shalom. As much as I tried to get him to join, he was no way a member of the shul. He was in no way, in any way, sort of Jewishly religious. But he always identified as a Jew. And he says exactly the same thing, right? He says, he writes a letter. His fiancée comes from a very distinguished rabbinic family, right? Her father, her grandfather, and brothers, uncles were all big rabbis. So he writes her and says, even if the forms wherein the old Jews were happy no longer afford us any shelter, something of the core, the essence of this meaningful life-affirming Judaism will never be absent from our home. So he promises we'll have a Jewish house, right? And then he's giving a speech to the Jewish community in Zurich. I can say that I stand as far from Jewish religion as from all religions. On the other hand, which is a great Jewish thing to say, right? I've always felt a strong feeling of belonging with my people and nurtured it into my children as well. But the important piece is this letter to the B'nai B'rith. What bound me to Judaism was not my faith, not even my national pride. Whenever I have inclined toward feelings of national exaltation, I've tried to suppress them as harmful and unfair. Frightened by the warning example of those people among whom we Jews live. Nationalism scared him, and rightly so. But there remains enough over to make the attraction of Judaism and the Jews irresistible. Many dark emotional powers, all the more powerful the less they could be expressed in words, as well as the clear consciousness of an inner identity, the familiarity of the same psychological structure. I owe to my Jewish nature the two characteristics that have been indispensable in my difficult life's way. Because I was a Jew, I found myself free from many prejudices which limit others in the employment of their intellect. And as a Jew, I was prepared to go into opposition. Right? I could think freely. I was not bound by the intellectual currents of conventional thinking in the worlds that I lived in. So, in 1920, he comes to America. He goes to Clark University in Massachusetts and gives a series of lectures which became known as the Introductory Lectures on Psychoanalysis. Right? And they're the most clear expression of the formation of Freudian thought that were ever put down. And so I gave you a section from this. Right? So here's what he's going to say. He says, I'm going to tell you two things you don't want to hear. I'm going to tell you two things you just don't want to hear. And I'm going to ask you at the end of the talk why it is that you're so resistant to these two ideas. Because your very resistance to these ideas are going to prove my point. Point number one, the most important power that shapes human beings is not conscious choice, but something called the unconscious. A vast realm of stuff that forms and shapes and makes you who you are that you have no control over. No control over, right? The first of these unpopular assertions, the second paragraph, made by psychoanalysis declares that mental processes are in themselves unconscious and that all of mental life is only certain individual acts and portions that are conscious. You know that on the contrary, we're in the habit of identifying. We like to think of ourselves as the accumulation of our conscious choices. But your choices aren't conscious. The stuff that really makes you who you are, you're not aware of. You're not conscious of it. It's all in that gooey stuff underneath. And this is where the whole notion of dreams comes from. Because what, after all, is a dream? Think about this a moment. We create our own dreams, right? You go to sleep, and there you are sitting in a movie theater or wherever you are watching this story. You're part of this story, right? No one created it except you, but you don't do it consciously. It's completely out of your control. And this gave away the whole thing, right? This is what the unconscious is. It's a part of you which you're not aware of, which you're not controlling, but basically controls you. It's not even it controls you. It is you. It is you, right? So look down about 5-6 lines from the bottom. But you, ladies and gentlemen, naturally cannot understand as yet what right I have described as a prejudice, a statement of so abstract a nature as what is mental is conscious. Nor can you guess what development can have led to the denial of unconscious, should such a thing exist, and what advantage there may have been in that denial. The very fact that you're denying that there's an unconscious tells you that there is an unconscious. The question of whether we're about to make psyche coincide with the conscious or make it extend further sounds like an empty dispute without words, yet I can assure you that the hypothesis of there being unconscious mental processes paves the way to its decisive new orientation in the world of science. In 1920, it was it was a discovery, it was a mitzvah, a discovery that there's such a thing as the unconscious. That guides, that shapes us, that makes us who we are. Now, what does that mean? Think for a second. So what is he saying? So therefore, what is the interpretation of dreams? The dream is a piece of the unconscious which has been revealed to us. But it reveals itself to us in its own language, in a language of symbols. And if you could understand those symbols, what can you understand? Yourself. You could understand what drives you, what's going on in you that you don't even know what's going on. That's the whole point. Now think about that for just a minute. Joseph says to Pharaoh, You had a dream. And what did the dream tell you? That there are forces governing the life of your nation which you don't understand. Forces governing the life of your nation that you can't control, that you can't manipulate. They're forces that are going to turn the life of this nation up and down, and you don't have any. You're Pharaoh, and you think you're so powerful? You don't know what you're up against. But by interpreting the dream, I can interpret those forces. I can understand those forces. And if I can understand those forces, maybe I can't stop them, but I can cope with them. I can help you cope with them. What did Sigmund Freud say to us? There are forces in your psychology, in your mind, that are creating you as the person you are. They do this without you knowing it, and you are a slave to those things until someone comes and helps you understand them. What is psychoanalysis? It's about $250 an hour, 5 days a week for 25 years. And you'll still be afraid of snakes and airplanes and rabbits. But by sitting on the analyst's couch and describing your dreams and describing your thoughts and describing your feelings and describing your actions, suddenly the analyst does to your inner life, your unconscious, what Joseph did for the Pharaoh. He gives you a pitaron, a solution to the puzzle. Well, here's what's going on. You're carrying this anxiety and this fear and these impulses and these reflexes, and look at the way that they're shaping you. And if you've ever been in any kind of therapy situation, there is a moment in the therapy situation when the therapist says, this is what's going on in your life. And you stop and you say, oh my God, you're right. Or else you say, screw you, and you leave. And then 2 hours later, you come back and say, oh my God, you're right. Because you don't want to hear it. You don't want to hear it. But that's how it works. It's a pitaron. It's a solution. It's an interpretation. It's the key. When you have a treasure map, it's the key to the map. And it shows you a different way to understand the landscape of your psychology so that now you can't control it, but at least you can cope with it. It's a basic empowerment strategy. And that's what psychoanalysis, and that's what psychoanalysis does to the mind, and that's what Joseph did for the Pharaoh. He gave them a way to understand and to manage the forces that were working on him. And one more level to this, which is, what is this saying to the reader of the story? Okay? Now, the other piece of Freud, if you want to turn the page over, which is much racier, which is, he says, and everything in your unconscious is repressed sexual desire. That was not a popular idea in 1920. That's not even a popular idea now. But we can get back to that. But the idea that there's these forces working on you that you don't understand. What an interesting idea. Okay, you want to add something? Where's the mic? Hang on, wait. Yes,
What about daydreaming?
Daydreaming. Yes, same thing.
Same thing.
It's unconscious. No?
It is.
No, it's not unconscious, it's conscious.
Conscious?
You're aware that you're going into a wishful thinking type of thing, daydreaming, wishing.
It's not as unconscious as... It's called The Interpretation of Dreams by Sigmund Freud. It's available online. Costs you about $3 on Amazon. Get it used. Or you can come to my office and borrow my copy. And you'll read it and tell us, okay? All right? Yes?
So, Rabbi, how does the dream interpret it in the future?
Yeah.
Meaning the parent had predicted the future.
Right.
So how does that come about?
Yeah, see, what does he say to him? He says, there are forces working there are forces at work in your world, which you don't understand. The dream gave him an insight into what those forces are, right? Joseph interprets it as God's will. I interpret it as economic cycles. Whatever it is, there are forces where you think you control things. You don't. There are forces you can't control that are at work shaping your world. Once I tell you what those forces are, once I show you how they work, we can develop a strategy to help you manage them. That's the structure of this. You see this? And Freud did that for human individuals. Joseph did it for the Pharaoh. And the genius is to be able to step outside of the sense of inevitability, of the sense that the forces that are working on me, first of all, I don't understand them, so you reveal them to me. And second of all, that I'm subject to them inevitably, and I can't do anything about them. I can't do anything about them. What a therapist does is reframe your life situation into a different narrative so that you could do something about it. Right? If you keep screaming at your kids in this way, they're going to keep responding in this way. I can't tell you how many times I've had that conversation with members of this congregation. Right? Rabbi, my kid just doesn't respect me. Really? Why not? Right? Well, he comes to my house and I just, So you say to the person, here's what's going on. Try this. Usually they don't, and they get mad at me, and they go away, and they go to a therapist for $200 and something an hour, tells them the exact same thing, and they say, genius therapist. But sometimes people go home, and they'll come and say, it worked. My God. Right? I mean, I don't know how many of you, we all have relationships, and you ever have a relationship, and it's just, something's just not working? So you go to a friend, or you go to somebody, and you say, why isn't this working? And they reframe it, and they show you how it looks from the other person's point of view, and suddenly it makes some sense. That's what Joseph is doing. That's what Freud did to the unconscious. He gave us a key to understanding the forces that shape us. Yeah.
Just one minor thing. Bruno Bettelheim wrote a short book about Freud. And Bruno Bettelheim was a Freudian psychoanalyst.
Yeah.
And he said that one of the problems with interpreting Freud is interpreting his German into English.
Yeah.
And he said the whole idea, he never used the word, interestingly enough, the German word repression.
Uh-huh.
He said, we have these things that we carry with us, and we shove them aside into a corner.
Yeah.
And just as you were talking about Freud saying there are things out there that we have to be aware of, he said, and those things which lie in that corner are always peering at us, waiting to open up that sack in which we put them in and attack us.
Yeah.
And we have to be aware of that to prevent it from happening. And that is probably the key. And Bettelheim's thing was, that's the key to Freudian psychoanalysis. Analysis.
Right. And then you get the other thing, of course, is we use the phrase, so we all learned Freud through translation. I did. So you get id, ego, superego. But the word id in German just means I. It's me. It's not like it's some force in my head. Ego just means the self. It means the self. And and superego. These are we end up making these into, we end up reifying these in strange ways that he didn't intend. Right? So what happens here is, you have the two greatest dream interpretators in all of Jewish history. And they come from this interesting place of Jewish genius, which allows you to see things that nobody else can see, because you're not drowning in the reality. You can step out of the reality and look at it from a different point of view, a different set of eyes. Right? A different set of eyes. Joseph attributes this to God. If you want to be less religious about it, you can also attribute it to spending a couple of years in prison, because where he could see the world through the eyes of the people he met in prison. But in any case, he can see the world, and he offers Pharaoh something which every official, every ruler always wants. Give me a strategy. Give me a strategy. Give me a strategy to deal with this. Give me a narrative that makes sense, and give me a strategy. And he becomes that person. And you remember how Joseph started. It's very subtle. Let Pharaoh find a guy who's wise and discerning, who can figure. So Pharaoh says, hey, I found the guy. So here we're back in the story. You ready? Comes the denouement of the story. I'm going to give you a happy ending here. Right? Pharaoh, the plan pleased Pharaoh. 254, chapter 41, verse 37. And Pharaoh said, could we find another man like the man who was filled, in whom the Spirit of God? So Pharaoh says, So Pharaoh says to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there's none so discerning as wise as you. You'll be in charge. So the kid who yesterday, literally yesterday, was forgotten in the prison, ends up right there next to Pharaoh. You'll be in charge, and by your command shall my people be directed. Only with respect to the throne shall I be superior to you. Now that's a Jewish daydream if I ever heard one. Oh my God. That's, I mean, you think that's really what he said? I mean, but even if he didn't say it. Right? Pharaoh further said, I put you in charge of the land of Egypt. And he removed the signet ring from his hand, which is the symbol of authority. And he put it on Joseph's hand. And he had him dressed in robes of fine linen and a gold chain around his neck. You just stop that. Stop that. Stop that. Stop that. Stop that. Stop that. And he had him ride in a chariot of his second command, and they cried before him, Abrek, which in Yiddish is Avek, you know, get out of the way. And they placed him, wait, and the next paragraph, that would be enough. You didn't need anything else, right? But the next paragraph, because this is such a great, a well-told story. Pharaoh said to, I am Pharaoh, yet without you no one shall lift a hand or a foot in all of Egypt. That's how powerful you are. Then he gave Joseph the name Tzafnach Paneach. That's his Egyptian name. So that's interesting. So Joseph is now going to have a double identity. Right? He's going to have an out identity and an in identity. Inside, outside. Inside, outside aren't going to match. Which is going to become the motivation for the rest of the story, that inside and outside don't match. Outside, he is powerful man in Egypt. Tzafnach Paneach. Right? It's an Egyptian phrase. There's a lot of midrash on what it might mean. But it's an Egyptian phrase. Inside, he's Joseph, son of Jacob. Filled with anger and rage at his family for selling him down here. Filled with self-pity from all those years sitting in a prison. Filled with, God knows what. What's he filled with? That's the question. We know what he looks like on the outside. Incredibly powerful. How soft is he on the inside? Right? Oh, and one more little thing, just in case you have a sense of humor. And he gave him his wife, Osnat, daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On. Who did he get to marry? The daughter of the woman who tried to seduce him.
Catherine
Here's to you, Mrs. Robinson, Mrs. Potiphar. Right? Pharaoh loves you more than you will know. No. He gets to marry Catherine Ross. He gets to marry Mrs. Robinson's daughter. Oh, come on, you guys. Have a little fun with... That's so funny. That's the Bible having a lot of fun with you. Come on. Because she never appears anywhere in the story ever again. But you and I know, like, oh, my God. Right? And Joseph emerged in charge of Egypt. Right? Now, go down. Turn to page 256. So we get a peek at the inside Joseph. The next paragraph, during the 7 years of plenty, the land produced in abundance. He gathered all the grain. That's the outside. That's Tzafnach Paneach, the prime minister of Egypt. What's inside? Outside, power, authority, almost ultimate power, because he controls the food supply of the whole known world. Ultimate authority. Inside, before the famine came, Joseph became the father of two sons, Mazel Tov, whom Asnat, daughter of Potiphar, in case you missed it the first time, bore to him. He named his firstborn Menashe, meaning what? God has made me forget completely my hardship and my Beit Avi, the house of my father. God has made me forget. So first of all, Dr. Freud, what do you call that? When you make a conscious effort to forget something, it's called repression. Because it takes an enormous amount of energy to remember and to forget, because you might forget to forget and end up remembering, until you always have to remember what it is you're trying to forget. And what is he trying to forget? Excuse me, but the bastards who sent me here the first time. What's inside? Outside, man of ultimate power. What's inside? A wounded child. A wounded child who is still filled with rage over the ones who wounded him, who still wanted to be loved by the brothers, who still wanted to be protected by the father, and who everyone betrayed, and he never forgot it, ever. Outside, ultimate power. Inside, deep, deep, painful wound. And the second kid, and the second one he named Ephraim, meaning God has made me fertile. Where? Be'eretz onyi, in the land of my affliction, in the place of my pain. Eretz, land, place, onyi. On Yom Kippur, we did that same word. That's the word for fasting and hurting yourself on Yom Kippur. Right? In other words, what? Outside, ultimate power. Inside, deep, deep wound. Deep pain. Deep betrayal. Deep brokenness. You see the contrast? Safnach paneach, ultimate man of power. Black's nothing. Inside, empty hole. Empty hole needing to be filled. It's the contrast.
Merry Christmas!
Ho, ho, ho! I love it. I love it. I love it.
We didn't go caroling.
We should. Yay, da die, 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 ya ba 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 bye, ya bye, bye, bye. I tell you, I sing Christmas carols. They all come out sounding Hasidic. You know, yay, da die, die, Adon olam asher malach, b'zerem kol yitzir nivra. It's terrible. It's a terrible malady. All right, you see the contrast. You see what's going on here. You see why Sigmund Freud is so important. What would Freud say about the Joseph story? Right? Here's a man who controls the world, but doesn't control his own heart. And he doesn't know that he's being controlled by the heart, by the wounds, the brokenness that he carries with him. And the question is, what can heal him? Now, I'm going to one more point, then we're going to get everyone's comments, then we're going to go daven. Ready? There's one more level of this. So I've given you, we talked about Joseph, we talked about Freud. He's us. He's us. He literally is Ben Yisrael. We are B'nai Yisrael. His story is our story. He is us. This story is so powerful because we are a people in exile. And this is the story about an exilic people. And what does this say about a story of people in exile? There are forces of working on you and your history that you don't understand. That if you could see them, you would understand your own history and why you're in these places. But there are also effects on you that you don't understand. That your history, as much as you think that you've survived your history and made it out alive, you carry wounds. And those wounds manipulate you. Those wounds change the way that you respond to the world and to people. Be careful of those wounds, because those wounds can destroy you in the end. You can be the most powerful man in Egypt, but those wounds can kill you. They can certainly kill your relationships. They can certainly kill your ability to love. That's the warning to the Jewish people. It's in this story. All right, let's get some comments. Douglas.
Why does the Midrash call him Joseph Hatzadik?
Oh, Hatzadik. Joseph Hatzadik. Why does the Midrash call him Joseph Hatzadik? I think you have to wait till next week to find out. No, honest to God. Because I think it's going to have to do with the reconciliation with his brothers. Because he has every reason in the world to keep on the mask and deny his... He has every reason in the world to kill his brothers, which he could do. He has every reason in the world at least to deny their existence, to pay no attention to them, to realize he's moved on, and not to carry them, but he encounters them. He encounters them. And when he encounters them, he puts them through a terrible trial, and then in the end what he does is he decides to reconcile with them. And so the question is going to be, why does he reconcile with them? Why does he reconcile with them? And again, I'm going to ask you to read the story on many levels. It's Joseph reconciling with his brothers, and this is the story of the Jewish people. Do we have enough wisdom and enough self-understanding to recognize the wounds that have been inflicted on us by our history and not kill each other. And not kill each other. The rabbi said that the reason we lost Jerusalem was sinas chinam, because we couldn't stop killing each other to meet the enemy. And the Torah is trying to tell you something about us. We carry this ferocious case of PTSD. And one of its symptoms is when we can't fight the ones who hurt us, we fight each other. We do this to each other. And the Torah is begging you to recognize that. Why do you call the sons these names? They should have had sweet names. It should have been Brandon and Mackenzie. You know, two nice Egyptian names, Brett and Jennifer. You know, like he should have been a happy man. He should have been a happy man. He's not. He's a deeply unhappy man. He's a deeply tortured man. And the Torah is trying to tell you, we are a deeply tortured people. And what we do is we take it out on each other. So the question is, does he reconcile with his brothers? Why does he reconcile with his brothers? Is it really a reconciliation among the brothers? Can we Jews ever get our act together? That's, I think, what the Torah is asking us. That's the reason why. That's next week's lecture. You just heard it. You can sleep in.
Yeah.
Rabbi, welcome.
No, it's true. In 1939, in the invasion of the Nazi invasion of Poland, there was not a united Jewish front. Rosa Luxemburg and the other Jewish communists couldn't make peace with the Bundists and the other Jewish communists. We were divided even at the Nazi invasion, at the eve of the invasion. There was not a unified front. But I just wanted to compliment you on your masterful interpretation of this. I go, however,
I just want you to see what Dr. Freud taught us.
However,
can you imagine what's repressed in his unconscious?
At the root of the problems you so brilliantly identify is the ending.
Holy text.
I spit on Freud.
Oh, yeah. And he spits on you.
Find the subconscious. Find it. Where? Tell me now, after all of the legacy of Freud, why psychiatry is giving drugs and doesn't even really acknowledge psychotherapy except as a peripheral habit. Yeah. The fact of the matter is, and we see this from the great essay by Isaac Deutscher, The Non-Jewish Jew, it was this interstitial role of the European Jew, particularly between the wars, that you correctly identify as the source of our ability to look outward on society. It has, however, another implication, and that is the rejection of inherited Jewish religious belief. And the people who stuck the knife into Judaism, who killed Judaism for the modern world, even as they gave these unproven, irresponsible theories of communism and psychoanalysis to the world, were Marx and Freud. And we see it, just to take Freud, because Marx is another matter, and for that we need to look at his essay in 1844, Der Judenfrage, The Jewish Question, where we see his change. In Freud, the very fact is that what we see in Joseph is a communication with God through dreams. What we see in Freud is a communication with ourselves through dreams. Mm-hmm. And that is the entire difference. Without the possibility that God wants to speak to us, Judaism makes no sense. Without a real revelation, that is something living, something enduring, that is a direct communication between God and our own personal life, there is no reason to come here except for your brilliance and the enchiladas they serve sometimes for lunch.
Oh, mine.
The truth of the matter is, Freud killed what we must keep alive.
Give it to my dad. Give it to my dad. Yeah, Pop, go ahead.
As long as you're saying the Torah is teaching.
Wait, hang on.
As long as you're saying the Torah teaches the Jewish people, and this, you know why? You know why they hung the baker and retrieved the butler?
Why?
Because the baker worked in the basement of the palace with slaves and workers. The butler worked in the main hall with diplomats, officers, and members of their government.
Yeah.
The lesson the Torah teaches: if you want to survive, you have to have access to power and influence. And that's what the Jewish people have done all through the history.
Yeah.
We always managed to have influence with the power and the power that directing the government.
That's the Purim story. Now, Pop, you know why? You know why they hung the baker? Because he left the chocolate out of the marble cake. No, this is a family joke. This is a family joke. This is my dad. You know, is a very talented baker, and he tried to get his guys to put chocolate in a marble cake, and they'd always leave it. On Friday nights, we'd have a piece of marble cake, and my brother would say, "Pop, he left the chocolate out of the marble cake." And my dad had to hang bakers. There was a whole series of guys, right? That's why they hung the baker. But you're right. No, the story. That's the Purim story. That's the Purim story. I'm going to respond to Rabbi Gelman before we finish today, but I want to let everybody else have a chance to speak. So, Brian, hi.
The bifurcation of the face and the mask that we'll see next week.
Yeah.
And what we see now of the repressed anger.
Right.
And that power.
Right.
We see that or maybe a month ago when Jacob was deceiving his father. With
Right.
The outside. So we have a lot of that throughout the entire story.
Yeah, it's very good, by the way.
Throughout the Torah in general.
Right.
My question is, in Christianity and Islam, do you see that sort of deception, public outward facing, and then inward facing kind of struggle, that wrestling?
No, this is a very. I mean, maybe you do, because I'm not. I don't know all the midrashic sources in Islam and in Christianity, but this is what you're pointing out is the deep psychological wisdom and the sophistication of these stories. I mean, they're very sophisticated stories. This idea of outside inside. This idea of, as you said, the shrewd, deceptive character of Jacob, and now his son, who suffers from sort of the malady of the same thing, only it's not of his making. Wounded within, powerful without. Right.
Yeah, and just quick follow-up, is that something that you believe that we created in exile because of everything that we've experienced? Because of our small numbers, we've had to be shrewd, we've had to be cunning, we've had to, and then that relating to, let's say, the success of Israel being, small.
That's an interesting. That's an interesting thesis. I like to, as you've noticed, I teach the story on many different levels. So for me, one of the levels, of course, is the story itself. I'm interested in how the character develops, because I think it's just brilliant storytelling. On another level, I'm asking myself, who told this story and why? Yeah. And what did it do for the people who told the story? And sometimes I think it was a great help to them. To say, Joseph in the pit, forgotten by the cupbearer, that's me. And just like Joseph, I will be redeemed one day. Afal pisha yitmameh ani ma'amin, right? Right? Bimhera yavo elenu Moshiach ben David, right? We're a people of hope. We people have suffered more than any people in the world, and yet we have never given up hope. Right? Jews give up hope, that's the end of the Jewish people. The moment we accept history as an inevitability, instead of a plastic form that can change, the moment we give up hope in tomorrow, we stop being Jews, right? That's part of it. But then I think there's this other voice in here, which knows us so damn well, and says, that's the voice of the brothers' conflict always. And that's a warning to us, not to kill each other.
I come to you, we all come here for answers, and with what's
And I just keep asking you more questions.
It's helpful. We learn a lot. It's just what's going on.
Yeah.
What's going on with in New York and all these anti-Semitic things.
Isn't this horrible?
Yeah,
New York had the New York Jewish community had a terrible week.
Yeah, UJ and AJU and all those things. This is happening here, And, with a young family and all those things, we have to ask ourselves, like, are we the cunning Jew? Or are we the, who are we?
Yeah.
How do we behave now? Are we the tough? Are we the cunning? Are we the wise? Are we the peacemakers? Who are
Right. Well, I think part of it is we have to learn to we have to learn to listen to each other. We have to begin to heal some of the enmity among us. That's part of it in order to respond to this stuff. Part of it also is not to overestimate. I mean, I think that one of the huge differences here that has to be noted, it's the reason why this is not Germany in 1937, although there's some rabbi somewhere is going to give that sermon, is that look at the way that the culture has responded. Look at the way that the organized community, look at the way the governments have responded. I mean, they're not on the side of the haters. They're trying to protect us. It's difficult. We have a very close relationship with the police department.
Yeah, but can we rely? I just want to say.
Can we rely on them?
So in around the time of the Holocaust and World War II, there's a famous story about how Rabbi Stephen Weiss came to Meyer Lansky at that time and said, these neo-Nazis in New York, we don't know how to take care of them.
Yeah.
We can supply you the money and we can supply you the support and the political power, but the Jewish mob, you guys go take care of these neo-Nazis that are, what was it, the Nazi Bund?
The Nazis, yeah.
Yeah, and so, so that happened, 70 years ago here, and, that's.
But we're in a different place than we were then. First of all, you don't have the same neo-Nazi movement like you did then. That was different. That was much different than it is. And you were in a different place. We're in a very different place in the community right now. I'm not saying that the fears aren't real or that the dangers aren't real. The dangers are real, but we got to be very clear about what they are and how virulent they are and how difficult they are. Okay? Yeah.
I have a practical question.
Yes.
Saving the grain for 7 years, seeds and nuts and stuff like that, they get little creatures that live in them.
Yeah.
So how did they resolve
Refrigerators. Joseph learned how to make giant refrigerators. God taught him. No, you can dry grain. You can store dried grain. We've stored dry grain for a long time. So the little creatures get in there, but if you store them in a dry, you can store dry grain. I get them in my kitchen, but Tupperware. That's the other way. Giant, enormous Tupperware. Yes, please.
I think that one of the problems in New York right now, since we are from New York, is that there is a mayor who is not on the side of the Jews, and he is not on the side of the police. And so that what is allowed to be happening is allowed to be happening.
Okay. Yeah. I want to say one more thing. I want to hang on. I want to just do one more comment, then we're going to have to finish because I have to go bless a couple. So I really appreciated Rabbi Gelman's point of view. I just want to give you a slight answer because I had this conversation once when I was a rabbinical student. I did an internship with a rabbi who was also a practicing psychoanalyst, and very interesting intellectual fellow in New York City. And we used to have it out, and I took your side, by the way, about Freud and he answered the following. His father was a very orthodox rabbi in London, and he had run away, gotten degrees in anthropology and psychology, and became a Reconstructionist rabbi and also a psychotherapist. And he said to me, look, he said at the end, my father believes that revelation comes from the infinite mind of God. And I believe that revelation comes from the infinite mind of man. Who's to say that at that point of infinity that there isn't a connection between the two? Who's to say? And I think that's where I think that you're exactly right that between the war, that intellectualism destroyed a great deal of Judaism. But I think that there's still there's a wisdom here which I think that we can hold on to, which I think is very, very interesting and very important. And here you get a clear glimpse of it, that to read the deep infinite mind of man and to read the deep infinite mind of God might end up being pretty much the same exercise, right? And they're not entirely divorced from each other. But we'll carry this on. Next week, we will find out what happens to the man who wears the mask but carries his pain inside. Have a wonderful week. Have a great Hanukkah. Hag Sameach. Thank you. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Tzafnat Paneach is this equivalent to En Poter